The police officer's pen hovered over his notepad. He looked at me with that expression I'd seen 1,000 times before, the one that says, "Poor old woman," probably confused. "Mrs. Chen, you're saying your caregiver stole from you. Can you tell me what's missing?" I sat in my armchair, hands folded in my lap, and said nothing. Not yet. Behind him, through my living room window, I could see Jessica loading boxes into her car. My boxes. She moved quickly, glancing toward my house every few seconds. She didn't know I was watching. She didn't know I'd been watching for 3 months. The officer sighed. "Mrs. Chen," I said quietly, "Ning is missing." He blinked. "I'm sorry," I continued. "Nothing is missing because I know exactly where everything is." He closed his notepad. I could see him losing interest, already composing the report in his head. "Elderly woman, 73, possible dementia, wasted department time." "Then why did you call us, ma'am?" I turned to look at him fully for the first time. "I didn't call you about theft, officer. I called you about fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse. I have documentation. All of it, 3 months worth." His pen came back out. Jessica had come into my life on a Tuesday in September, sent by the care agency after my daughter Ellen insisted I needed help. "Mom, you're 73. You fell last year. You need someone." I hadn't wanted help. I'd raised 3 children alone after their father died. I'd worked as a bookkeeper for 40 years. I knew how to take care of myself. But Ellen was persistent, and I was tired of arguing, so I agreed. Jessica arrived with a bright smile and warm brown eyes. 28 years old, she told me, nursing student, grew up in foster care. No family. That last part should have meant nothing, but I noticed how her smile dimmed when she said it, how her hands twisted together. I knew that gesture. I'd made it myself once, long ago, before I learned to hide pain better. So I was kind to her. I showed her where everything was. I told her she could eat anything in the kitchen. I paid her in cash at the end of each week because she mentioned the agency took a large cut, and I remembered what it was like to be young and struggling. I trusted her. For 3 weeks, everything was perfect. She helped me with groceries, cleaned the house, drove me to doctor's appointments. She laughed at my stories. She brought me tea without being asked. She called me Mrs. Chen with respect in her voice. Then I noticed my mother's jade bracelet was gone. It had been in my jewelry box for 50 years, since my mother pressed it into my hands the day I left Taiwan. "For your daughter," she'd said, "for when you have a daughter." I'd worn it once, on my wedding day. Then I'd put it away, waiting for the right moment to give it to Ellen. Now it was gone. I stood in my bedroom, staring at the empty jewelry box, and something cold settled in my chest. I didn't say anything to Jessica. Not yet. Instead, I started watching. I watched her go through my mail when she thought I was napping. I watched her photograph my credit cards when I left them on the counter. I watched her copy numbers from my checkbook, her phone angled carefully to capture everything. I watched, and I said nothing, because I needed to understand, was this opportunistic, a moment of weakness, or was this who she really was? The answer came 2 weeks later when I saw her at the pharmacy, picking up prescriptions. Not from hadn't asked for any refills. She was using my insurance information, my identity. I stood behind a display of reading glasses and watched her sign for medications I didn't need. Expensive medications, the kind people sell. And I understood, I wasn't her first. I was simply her current. The elderly are easy targets. We're trusting, isolated, often confused. Who would believe us if we complained? Who would take our word over a young, educated caregiver with a bright smile? Jessica didn't see me that day. She collected my prescriptions and left. I stood there for a long time, thinking about my mother's bracelet, about the jade that had traveled across an ocean, about trust, and how easily it shatters. Then I went home and started documenting everything. Every missing item, every forged signature, every prescription filled in my name, every time she accessed my bank account or used my credit card information. I created spreadsheets. I took photographs. I made copies of everything. I did what I'd done for 40 years as a bookkeeper. I built an unshakable paper trail, and I waited. The officer was staring at me now. His expression completely changed. "Mrs. Chen, are you saying?" I interrupted. "I'm saying Jessica Martinez has been systematically defrauding me for 3 months. Identity theft, insurance fraud, prescription fraud, theft of property, and I can prove all of it." I pulled out the folder I'd prepared, 3 inches thick, everything organized by date and category, every document labeled and cross-referenced. His eyes widened as he flipped through it. "Mrs. Chen, this is extensive." I replied simply, I was a bookkeeper. I know how to keep records, he asked. Why did you wait 3 months? I looked out the window again. Jessica had stopped loading boxes. She was on her phone now, leaning against her car, laughing about something. Because I needed to be certain, I said, and because I needed enough evidence that there would be no doubt, no mercy, no plea bargain that would let her do this to someone else. The officer followed my gaze. Is that her? I confirmed, yes. He stood up, one hand moving toward his radio. Wait, I said. He paused. There's something else you should know. I opened my phone and showed him the folder I'd created. 47 photographs, 12 videos, GPS tracking data from her car. She didn't know I'd noticed the small device I'd attached when she parked in my driveway. She's been doing this to at least 3 other elderly clients, I said. I have documentation for all of them. Names, addresses, evidence of fraud. She parks outside their homes. She's in their houses right now, with their trust, just like she had mine. The officer's jaw tightened. How did you? I said calmly. I followed her. Old women are invisible. No one notices us. It makes surveillance quite easy. He stared at me for a long moment. Then, almost despite himself, he smiled slightly. Mrs. Chen, I think we should call a detective. I agreed. I think you should. As he made the call, I watched Jessica through the window. She'd finished her phone conversation and was heading back toward my house. She didn't know yet that her world was about to end. She didn't know that the weak-old woman she'd been stealing from had spent 3 months building a case that would send her to prison. She was still smiling as she opened my front door. Mrs. Chen, she called out, her voice bright and cheerful. I'm back. Did you need anything? I heard the officer tense beside me, but I simply said, come in, Jessica. There's someone here I'd like you to meet. Jessica froze in the doorway when she saw the police officer. For just a moment, less than a second, her mask slipped. I saw calculation flash across her face, then fear, then the bright smile snapped back into place like a shutter closing. Oh, is everything all right, Mrs. Chen? She looked between us, concern painted perfectly across her features. Did something happen? I had to admire the performance. If I hadn't spent 3 months watching her real face, I might have believed it myself. Everything's fine, Jessica. Officer Morrison just had some questions for me. She relaxed slightly. Oh good, you scared me for a second there. She laughed, setting down her purse. I thought maybe something bad happened. Something bad did happen. I thought, you just don't know it yet. But I didn't say that. Instead, I smiled the way I'd been smiling at her for 3 months, gentle, trusting, a little confused. The officer didn't say anything. He just watched her with eyes that had seen 1,000 liars before. Jessica shifted uncomfortably. Well, I should get started on dinner. Mrs. Chen, do you want your usual, the soup you like? I replied, that would be lovely, dear. She nodded and disappeared into the kitchen. But I caught her glancing back at the officer, uncertainty creeping into her expression. When she was gone, Officer Morrison looked at me. You're not going to confront her, I said quietly. No, I'm going to let the system do that, properly, legally, so there's no question about what she's done. He nodded slowly, respect settling into his features. The detective will be here in 20 minutes, I said. Good. I sat back in my chair and closed my eyes, thinking about how I'd gotten here. I'd always been the kind of person people underestimated. Quiet, small, soft-spoken. My late husband used to joke that I could disappear in a room full of people after he died a heart attack. Sudden, 30 years ago, everyone assumed I would fall apart. His business partners, his friends, even my own children, for a while. But I didn't fall apart. I'd been keeping his books for years. I knew the business inside and out. I knew which partners were loyal and which ones had been skimming money. I knew which contracts were sound and which ones would collapse. So I didn't grieve publicly. I grieved alone, at night, when no one was watching. During the day, I worked. I discovered that Howard, my husband's best friend and business partner, had been stealing from the company for 5 years. Small amounts at first, then larger ones as he grew confident. I discovered that the accountant had been falsifying records to hide it. I discovered a dozen small betrayals that would have destroyed everything my husband built. And I fixed it, quietly, methodically, without drama. I documented everything, just like I was documenting Jessica now. Then I went to the authorities with a case so airtight that Howard and the accountant both went to prison. My husband's other partners never knew how close they'd come to losing everything. They just knew that quiet Mrs. Chen somehow saved the business. They sold it a year later, gave me a generous settlement, and probably forgot I existed. That was 40 years ago. I'd hoped I'd never have to do something like that again, but when Jessica stole my mother's bracelet, I felt that same cold clarity settle over me, the same understanding that some people see kindness as weakness, that they'll take and take until someone stops them, and that if I didn't stop Jessica, she would do this to someone else, someone who maybe didn't have my experience, someone who wouldn't notice the missing jewelry or the forged signatures until it was too late. I thought about Mrs. Patterson, 3 houses down, 86 years old, her memory starting to fade. Her caregiver looked a lot like Jessica Young, friendly, trusted. What if Jessica moved on to her next? So I started following her. It wasn't difficult. Like I told the officer, old women are invisible. I could sit in my car outside someone's house for hours, and no one would give me a second glance. I watched Jessica visit Mrs. Eleanor Rodriguez on Maple Street. Sweet woman, 92, recently widowed. I watched Jessica help her inside with groceries, smiling and chatting. 2 days later, I watched Jessica at an ATM, using a card that wasn't hers. I wrote down the address. I researched Mrs. Rodriguez. I found her daughter's phone number. Then, I did the same thing at Mr. Thomas Webb's house. 78, lived alone, diabetic. Jessica brought him medications. 3 days later, those same medications appeared for sale on a resale website. I screenshot everything, and Mrs. Alice Kim, 81, Korean immigrant, limited English. Jessica drove her to church every Sunday. Jessica also had Mrs. Kim's social security number. I found credit cards opened in her name, loans, a second mortgage on Mrs. Kim's paid-off house. I documented all of it. Every victim, every crime, every piece of evidence. I built cases for people who didn't even know they were victims yet, and I hated every minute of it. Not the work. The work was familiar, almost comforting. Numbers don't lie. Paper trails tell the truth. What I hated was the betrayal. I'd been kind to Jessica. I'd paid her fairly. I'd listened to her stories about growing up in foster care, about struggling through nursing school, about having no family. I'd believed her when she said she wanted to help people. Maybe some of it was even true. Maybe she did grow up in foster care. Maybe she was struggling. But somewhere along the way, she'd decided that her struggles justified hurting people who'd shown her nothing but kindness. She'd decided that with the elderly, the trusting, the vulnerable, were acceptable casualties in her survival. From the kitchen, I heard Jessica humming. She was making my soup, the one she knew I liked, with carrots and celery cut exactly the way I preferred. She'd learned my preferences so carefully, studied me so thoroughly, all so she could rob me more effectively. The detective arrived exactly 20 minutes later. Detective Sarah Martinez, no relation to Jessica, she clarified immediately. She was in her 40s, sharpened with the same expression Officer Morrison had worn, skeptical at first, then increasingly focused as she looked through my documentation. Mrs. Chen, she said after 15 minutes of silence, flipping through the folder. This is remarkable. I said, thank you. She asked, how long have you been investigating? I answered, 3 months. She continued, and you never confronted her? I said, no. She pressed, why not? I looked toward the kitchen, where Jessica was still humming, because confrontation would have warned her. She would have run, changed her name, found new victims. I needed to make sure that when this ended, it ended completely. Detective Martinez nodded slowly. Mrs. Chen, I have to ask, were you ever afraid? She was in your home. She had access to everything. I answered simply, yes. Every day. But fear doesn't solve problems. Evidence does. She smiled slightly. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who'd seen too many elderly victims unable to prove what happened to them. You understand, we'll need to verify all of this. I assured her. Of course, I've included contact information for the other victims, and I've made copies of everything, she said. Of course you have. Jessica chose that moment to emerge from the kitchen, carrying a tray with my soup. She saw the detective and stopped cold. Oh, hello. Can I help with something? Detective Martinez stood. Jessica Martinez? Jessica responded, yes. The detective introduced herself. I'm Detective Sarah Martinez. I need to ask you some questions. Jessica's smile faltered. Questions? About what? The detective replied, about your employment as a caregiver. I watched color drain from Jessica's face, watched her eyes dart to the door, calculating distance, escape routes, watched her realize there was nowhere to go. I don't understand, she said, her voice smaller now. The detective said calmly, I think you do. But let's start with this. Do you have Mrs. Chen's insurance card in your possession? Silence. Jessica, the detective prompted. Jessica stammered. I might have picked it up by accident, the detective continued, and her credit card information. Jessica protested. No, I would never, the detective cut her off. We have photographs of you using her cards. Jessica's gaze snapped to me. For the first time since I'd met her, I saw the real person underneath. No warmth, no kindness, just cold calculation and growing panic. You, she whispered. You knew. I said nothing. You knew the whole time. Still nothing. Why didn't you just fire me? Why didn't you just? I said quietly. Because it wasn't just about me. It was about Mrs. Rodriguez, and Mr. Webb, and Mrs. Kim, and whoever would have come after them. If someone didn't stop you. She stared at me, and I saw the moment she understood, the moment she realized that the confused old woman she'd been stealing from had been 10 steps ahead the entire time. The soup tray slipped from her hands. It shattered on my hardwood floor, hot broth spreading across the wood like blood. Detective Martinez asked Jessica to sit down. Jessica didn't move. She was staring at me like she'd never seen me before, which in a way, she hadn't. Mrs. Chen, her voice shook. I don't know what you think happened, but the detective's voice was firm. Sit down, Ms. Martinez. Jessica sat. Her hands were trembling. She kept glancing at the door. Don't, Detective Martinez said simply. Officer Morrison is right outside. You're not going anywhere until we have some answers. I stood up slowly, using my cane. My hip genuinely did hurt. That fall last year had been real, even if I'd recovered better than I'd let people believe. I'm going to make tea, I said. The detective nodded. Take your time, Mrs. Chen. As I moved toward the kitchen, stepping carefully over the spilled soup, I felt Jessica's eyes following me. I could practically hear her thoughts. How much does she know? What evidence does she actually have? Can I talk my way out of this? In the kitchen, I filled the kettle and set it on the stove. My hands were steady. They'd been steady through this entire ordeal, even when I'd been terrified. Because I had been terrified, the night I'd realized what Jessica was doing, really understood the scope of it. I'd barely slept. I'd lain awake thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. What if she realized I knew? What if she decided an old woman who could identify her was too dangerous to leave alive? I'd read about elderly people attacked by caregivers, robbed and murdered in their own homes. What if I went to the police too early, without enough evidence, and they didn't believe me? What if Jessica convinced them I was confused, senile, paranoid? What if I was wrong? That last fear had haunted me for weeks. I'd checked and rechecked every piece of evidence, verified every transaction, confirmed every forged signature. Because if I was wrong, if there was some innocent explanation, I would be destroying a young woman's life. But I wasn't wrong. The evidence was clear. The pattern was undeniable. Jessica Martinez was a predator who specialized in elderly victims. So I'd made a plan, step by step, just like I used to plan audits. Step 1, document everything, every theft, every fraudulent transaction, every lie. Create a timeline so detailed that no defense attorney could poke holes in it. Step 2, identify other victims. If Jessica had done this before, and I was certain she had, there would be a trail. I just had to find it. That had been harder than I expected. I couldn't exactly go door to door asking if anyone's caregiver was robbing them. I couldn't access police databases or financial records. But I could follow Jessica. I'd started simply. I watched where she went when she left my house. I wrote down addresses. I looked up property records to find the owners' names. Mrs. Rodriguez, Mr. Webb, Mrs. Kim, all elderly, all living alone, all vulnerable. Then I'd done something that still made me uncomfortable. I'd posed as a concerned neighbor. I'd knocked on Mrs. Rodriguez's door with a plate of cookies, introduced myself, asked casual questions. How are you managing? Do you have help? How's your caregiver working out? Mrs. Rodriguez had loved having someone to talk to. She'd invited me in for tea. She'd told me all about Jessica, so sweet, so helpful, so trustworthy. I'd asked about her medications, her finances, whether she'd noticed anything unusual. Well, Mrs. Rodriguez had said, frowning slightly, my bank did call about some charges I didn't recognize, but Jessica said it was probably just a mistake. She's been helping me sort it out. My blood had run cold. I'd left my phone number. If you ever need anything, I'd said, or if anything seems wrong, please call me. Then I'd gone home and added Mrs. Rodriguez to my documentation. I'd done the same with Mr. Webb and Mrs. Kim. Different approaches. A question about the neighborhood. Watch for Mr. Webb, a conversation in Korean, at the grocery store for Mrs. Kim. But the same goal, find the victims, document the crimes, build the case. Step 3. Set the trap. This was the dangerous part, the part that could have backfired. I'd needed Jessica to incriminate herself in a way that was undeniable. I'd needed her to make a mistake, big enough that even the best lawyer couldn't explain it away. So, I'd left bait, a checkbook, accidentally left on the kitchen counter with several blank checks, a credit card, forgotten on the bathroom sink, my iPad, password written on a sticky note, with all my financial apps logged in. I'd waited to see what Jessica would do. She'd taken the bait every time. She'd forged checks, used the credit card, accessed my bank accounts, and I'd documented every single transaction with timestamps, screenshots, and security camera footage I'd installed in my own home. Teeny cameras. Jessica never noticed because she was looking for confused old woman, not a meticulous investigator. Step 4. Wait for the right moment. I couldn't move too soon. If Jessica realized what I'd discovered, she'd disappear. I'd seen enough crime shows to know that, but I also couldn't wait too long. Every day I waited, she was potentially hurting more people. So I'd chosen today. I'd called the police this morning. I'd prepared my documentation. I'd made sure everything was in order. And I'd waited for Jessica to arrive for her shift, acting like nothing had changed. The kettle whistled. I poured hot water over tea leaves, real tea, loose leaf, the kind my mother had taught me to make, and carried 2 cups into the living room. Detective Martinez accepted hers with a nod. Jessica just stared at hers. You made me tea, Jessica said, her voice hollow. I replied, yes. She continued, after all this, you made me tea. I said simply, habit, I suppose. Jessica's voice rose. You're insane. I corrected her. No, I'm careful. Detective Martinez cleared her throat. Ms. Martinez, I need to ask you about several transactions. Jessica cut her off. I want a lawyer. The detective responded. That's your right. But I should inform you that we have extensive documentation of. Jessica insisted. I don't care what you have. I'm not saying anything without a lawyer. Smart, I thought distantly. That was the smart move. But it wouldn't save her. The detective stood. All right, we'll continue this at the station. Ms. Martinez, you're under arrest for suspicion of identity theft, fraud, and elder abuse. Jessica's face crumpled. Real tears now, not performed ones. Mrs. Chen, please, I didn't mean. I was desperate. I needed the money for school, for rent. I didn't have anyone to help me. I met her eyes. Neither did Mrs. Rodriguez. Neither did Mr. Webb or Mrs. Kim. They didn't have anyone to help them either. That's why they trusted you. Jessica protested. I never hurt anyone, I said firmly. You stole their identities, their savings, their sense of safety. You hurt everyone you touched. She opened her mouth, closed it. No more excuses came out. Officer Morrison came in and read Jessica her rights. I watched them put handcuffs on her wrists, gentle, professional, but firm. As they led her toward the door, she looked back at me one last time. I thought you liked me, she said. I replied, I did. That's what made this so much worse. Then she was gone, and it was just me and Detective Martinez in my living room, with spilled soup drying on the floor, and 2 cups of tea growing cold. Mrs. Chen, the detective said after a moment, what you did, building this case alone, without support, while she had access to your home, that took remarkable courage. I corrected her. It took necessity. Someone had to stop her. The detective observed. Most people would have just fired her, filed a simple police report, maybe gotten some money back. I said, most people aren't bookkeepers. We tend to be thorough. She laughed. Clearly. Then her expression grew serious. You know we'll need your testimony. This will go to trial, most likely. Her lawyer will try to discredit you. They'll suggest you were confused, mistaken, that you're too old to remember things clearly. I said confidently. Let them try, she warned. It won't be pleasant. I replied. Neither was being robbed by someone I trusted. I've been underestimated my entire life. Detective Martinez, I'm used to it, and I'm very good at proving people wrong. She nodded slowly. I believe you are. After she left, I sat alone in my quiet house. The documentation folder was gonna us now, in police custody. The soup was still spilled on my floor, and I was tired, so deeply tired, but I wasn't done yet. I picked up my phone and dialed the first number on my list. Mrs. Rodriguez, this is Mrs. Chen. We met a few weeks ago. I need to tell you something about your caregiver, Jessica. There were 3 more calls to make after that. 3 more elderly people who needed to know they'd been betrayed. 3 more victims who needed to understand they weren't alone, weren't confused, weren't imagining things. It was going to be a long night. But then again, I'd had 3 months of long nights. What was one more? The preliminary hearing was on a Tuesday morning in November. I arrived at the courthouse 40 minutes early, driven by my daughter Ellen, who still didn't quite understand everything that had happened. "Mom, are you sure about this?" she asked for the 3rd time as we walked through the metal detectors. "You could just let the prosecutor handle it. You don't have to testify if it's too stressful," I assured her. "I'm sure." She pressed on. "But the lawyer, Jessica's lawyer, they're going to try to make you look confused, senile, like you imagined the whole thing." I smiled at my daughter. Let them try. Ellen had been horrified when she learned what Jessica had done. Guilty, too, because she was the one who'd insisted I needed a caregiver in the first place. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I should have vetted her better. I should have," I'd told her. "You didn't know." Neither did I. That's how people like Jessica operate. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Jessica sat at the defense table with her attorney, a sharp-looking woman in her 50s who'd already tried to get the charges dismissed 3 times. All 3 motions had failed. The evidence was too strong. Jessica looked different than she had 3 months ago. Thinner, pale, her hair pulled back severely. No warm smile, no bright eyes. She looked like what she was, a woman facing 20 years in prison. When her gaze met mine, something flickered across her face. Not anger, something more complicated. Shame, maybe, or calculation. With Jessica, it was hard to tell the difference. The prosecutor was a young man named David Chen, no relation. Despite the name, he'd told me he specialized in elder abuse cases because his own grandmother had been scammed out of her life savings. These predators count on elderly victims being too confused or embarrassed to fight back, he'd said during our prep meeting. "But you're neither confused nor embarrassed. You're their worst nightmare." Now, as the judge entered and we all stood, I felt strangely calm. I'd spent months preparing for this. Months gathering evidence, documenting crimes, building an unassailable case. This was just the final step. The hearing was brief. The prosecutor presented a summary of the evidence. The defense attorney argued that the charges were excessive, based on misunderstandings and circumstantial evidence. The judge looked unimpressed. "Counselor, I've reviewed the documentation provided by Mrs. Chen. It's remarkably thorough. Forged signatures, fraudulent credit card charges, identity theft. These are not misunderstandings." The defense attorney protested. "Your Honor, my client was in a position of trust. Mrs. Chen may have misinterpreted." The judge interrupted. "Are you suggesting that Mrs. Chen forged her own signature to frame your client?" Pause. "No, Your Honor." The judge continued. "Are you suggesting that Mrs. Chen fraudulently used her own credit cards and then blamed your client?" The attorney backtracked. "Of course not." But the judge cut her off. "Then, I'm not sure what you're suggesting." He turned to the prosecutor. "Mr. Chen, I'm ordering Ms. Martinez to stand trial on all counts. Bail is set at $100,000. Jessica's face went white. Her lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently. Jessica shook her head. More whispers. I understood what was happening. Jessica couldn't make bail. She'd spent all the money. She'd stolen my money, Mrs. Rodriguez's money, Mr. Webb's money, had nothing left. She was going to jail. Today. Right now. As the bailiff approached, Jessica twisted in her seat to look at me. "Please," she called out. "Mrs. Chen, please. I know I made mistakes, but I can't go to jail. Please." I said nothing. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was desperate. I didn't think. I never meant to hurt you." The judge banged his gavel. "Ms. Martinez, you'll have an opportunity to address the court at your trial." But Jessica wasn't looking at the judge. She was looking at me, tears streaming down her face. "You were kind to me," she said, her voice breaking. "You were the only one who was kind. How could you do this?" I stood up slowly. Ellen reached for my arm, but I gently moved her hand away. "How could I do this?" I repeated quietly. "Jessica, you stole my mother's bracelet, the last thing I had from her. You stole Mrs. Rodriguez's savings money she needed for her medications. You stole Mr. Webb's identity and ruined his credit. You took out a mortgage on Mrs. Kim's house, the house her husband built with his own hands before he died." My voice never rose. I didn't need to shout. "You looked at people who trusted you, who were kind to you, and you saw opportunities, victims, easy targets." Jessica protested. "I needed the money," I continued firmly. So did they. They needed their money for food, medicine, housing, for dignity, for survival. I took a breath. I didn't do this to you, Jessica. You did this to yourself. I just made sure there were consequences. The bailiff was at her elbow now. Jessica was crying openly, her carefully constructed mask finally, completely shattered. I'm 28 years old, 20 years in prison. My life is over, I said softly. Mrs. Rodriguez is 92. You almost destroyed the last years of her life. Mr. Webb is 78 and diabetic. The stress you caused triggered a heart episode. He's in cardiac rehab now. Mrs. Kim is 81 and didn't speak English well enough to understand what you'd done to her until I explained it. She cried for 3 hours. I paused. Your life isn't over, Jessica. It's just harder now. Like you made their lives harder. Like you would have continued making people's lives harder if no one had stopped you. The bailiff led her away. She was still crying, still protesting, still saying she was sorry. But sorry didn't give Mrs. Rodriguez her savings back. Sorry didn't restore Mr. Webb's credit. Sorry didn't return my mother's bracelet, which we never found, which Jessica probably sold within days of taking it. Sorry was just a word. Outside the courthouse, Ellen hugged me tightly. Mom, I've never seen you like that. I asked, like what? She pulled back, studying my face. Strong, powerful. I always thought of you as, I don't know, sweet, quiet, someone who needed protecting. I smiled. I am sweet and quiet. That doesn't mean I need protecting. She laughed, but there were tears in her eyes. I'm sorry I ever thought you did. The trial itself came 3 months later, in February. Jessica's attorney had tried every tactic. Delay, dismiss, discredit. None of it worked. The evidence was overwhelming. On the witness stand, I presented my documentation calmly and clearly. Bank statements, forged checks, security camera footage, timestamp logs. The defense attorney tried to rattle me. Mrs. Chen, you're 73 years old. Is it possible you simply forgot giving Jessica permission to use your credit cards? I answered. No, she pressed. Are you certain? Memory can be unreliable at your age, I interrupted. I have 40 years of experience as a bookkeeper. I have never forgotten a financial transaction in my life, she continued. But surely you've made mistakes, I countered. I tracked every penny my husband's company spent for 20 years. I identified embezzlement that professional auditors missed. I built this entire case alone, while Ms. Martinez had complete access to my home and finances. Does that sound like someone with memory problems? The attorney changed tactics. You went to great lengths to document my client's alleged crimes. Some might say you were obsessed, paranoid. I responded. I was thorough, she argued. You followed her, took photographs, tracked her movements. That's not thorough, that's stalking. I explained. I investigated a crime being committed against me. That's not stalking. That's self-defense, she challenged. You could have simply gone to the police, I replied. With what evidence? My word against hers. I'm an old woman with a cane. She's a young nursing student. Who would the police have believed? I looked directly at the jury. I knew I needed proof. Undeniable proof. So I gathered it. The attorney tried one more angle. Mrs. Chen, you've portrayed yourself as a victim, but you set traps for my client. You left your checkbook out deliberately. You made it easy for her to steal from you. Some might say you entrapped her. I smiled slightly. Counselor, I left my valuables in my own home. If your client couldn't resist stealing them, that's not entrapment. That's opportunity revealing character. The courtroom was silent. If I left my door unlocked, would that justify someone robbing me? If I wore jewelry, would that excuse someone stealing it? I shook my head. Jessica Martinez had dozens of opportunities to be honest, to do her job, to walk away. She chose theft, repeatedly, deliberately. That's not my fault. That's hers. The attorney had no more questions. Mrs. Rodriguez testified. She described trusting Jessica, believing her lies, discovering that her savings were gone. I thought I was losing my mind, she said, crying. I thought I was getting senile. I was so ashamed. I didn't tell anyone, for months. Mr. Webb testified about the fraudulent credit cards, the destroyed credit rating, the stress that triggered his heart problems. Mrs. Kim testified in Korean, with a translator, about losing the house her husband had built, about nearly becoming homeless at 81. Each testimony added weight. Each victim showed the jury exactly who Jessica Martinez really was. The prosecution presented the evidence I'd gathered, all of it. 3 months of documentation, organized and irrefutable. The defense presented character witnesses who said Jessica was kind, hardworking, a victim of circumstances, but they couldn't explain the evidence. They couldn't explain the forged signatures, the stolen medications, the fraudulent accounts. They couldn't explain why, if Jessica was truly desperate and good-hearted, she'd targeted the most vulnerable people she could find. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, Jessica stood with her attorney, her face pale and expressionless. On the count of identity theft. How do you find guilty? On the count of elder abuse. Guilty. On the count of fraud. Guilty. 15 counts in total. 15 guilty verdicts. Jessica didn't cry this time, she just closed her eyes. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge gave her the maximum, 20 years, with the possibility of parole after 12. Ms. Martinez, the judge said, you violated the trust of the most vulnerable members of our society. You saw their loneliness, their need for help, their kindness, and you exploited it. This court must send a message that such predatory behavior will not be tolerated. Jessica was led away. She didn't look at me. Outside the courthouse. Reporters wanted statements. I kept mine brief. I hope this case shows other elderly victims that they can fight back, that their word matters, that age doesn't mean weakness. Do you feel like you got justice? One reporter asked. I thought about my mother's bracelet, still missing, about Mrs. Rodriguez's savings, never fully recovered, about Mr. Webb's heart, damaged by stress, about Mrs. Kim's house, sold to pay off fraudulent debt. I feel like we prevented more victims, I said. That's not quite justice, but it's something. 6 months after Jessica's sentencing, I received a letter. It came from the prison, forwarded through my attorney because Jessica no longer had my address directly. Ellen watched me open it. You don't have to read that, Mom. I know. But I did anyway. Dear Mrs. Chen, I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I know I have no right to contact you, but I've been in therapy here, and my therapist says I need to take accountability for what I did, not just say sorry, but really understand it. I've spent 6 months thinking about what you said in court, about how I saw people's kindness as weakness, how I looked at lonely old people and saw opportunities instead of human beings. You were right. I grew up in foster care. And I learned early that nobody helps you, that you have to take what you can get because nobody's going to just give it to you. I learned that being sweet and helpful got me what I needed: food, a place to sleep, adults who'd protect me. I learned to perform kindness because real kindness never existed. When I started working as a caregiver, I told myself I was just surviving, taking a little here and there from people who had so much, people who wouldn't miss it, people who'd forget anyway. I never thought about who they really were. I never let myself think about it. Mrs. Rodriguez reminded me of a foster grandmother I had once, the only adult who was ever kind to me without wanting something back, but I stole from her anyway. Mr. Webb had the same gentle way of speaking that my high school counselor had, the one who got me a scholarship to nursing school, but I destroyed his credit anyway. Mrs. Kim couldn't speak English well. Just like I couldn't when I first came to this country from the Philippines, but I put her at risk of homelessness anyway. And you treated me like family. You paid me fairly. You listened to me. You trusted me. And I stole your mother's bracelet. I sold it for $200 to a pawn shop on 5th Street. I didn't even get what it was worth. I just needed money for rent, and it was easy. And I didn't let myself think about what it meant to you. I'm not writing this to make you feel sorry for me. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I'm writing because my therapist said I need to face what I did. Really face it. So here's the truth. You were kind to me, and I betrayed you. You were the kind of person I should have wanted to become: strong, smart, capable, despite everyone underestimating you. Instead, I became the kind of person who hurt you. That's on me, not on my childhood, not on being desperate, on me. I have 12 years before I'm eligible for parole, probably more, because I don't think they'll give it to me on the first try. I'm 29 now. I'll be at least 41 when I get out, if I ever do. You were right about something else too. My life isn't over. It's just harder now. Asterisk, I'm trying to use this time to become someone different, someone better, someone who sees kindness, not as weakness to exploit. Asterisk, I don't know if I'll succeed, but I'm trying. Asterisk, I don't expect you to care. I don't expect you to write back. I just needed you to know that I finally understand what I did, who I hurt, what I destroyed. Asterisk, and I'm sorry. Really, truly sorry. Not because it helps me, but because you deserved better. Jessica Martinez. I read it twice, then set it down. Asterisk, what does it say? Ellen asked. Asterisk, that she understands now, or thinks she does. Asterisk, are you going to respond? Asterisk, I thought about it, thought about the young woman who'd smiled so warmly in my kitchen, who'd made my soup and remembered how I liked my tea, who'd stolen from me and 3 other elderly people without apparent remorse. Asterisk, no, I said finally. This letter is for her, not for me. It's part of her process. I don't need to be part of it. Asterisk, Ellen nodded. You're probably right. She paused. Do you think she really has changed? Asterisk, I don't know. Maybe she's just learned to perform remorse as well as she performed kindness. I folded the letter carefully. Either way, it's not my concern anymore. Asterisk, cold mom. Asterisk, protective. I corrected. I've learned that some people will take everything you give them and still ask for more. I'm done giving Jessica Martinez anything, including the benefit of my doubt. Asterisk, but I didn't throw the letter away. I filed it with the rest of the case documentation in a folder I kept in my office. Asterisk, not because I believed her. Asterisk, because I wanted a complete record. Asterisk, the aftermath of the trial had been complicated. Asterisk, Mrs. Rodriguez had recovered most of her savings through restitution orders. Though the emotional damage lingered, she'd become anxious, suspicious. She refused to get another caregiver, even when her daughter begged her to accept help. I can't trust anyone anymore, she'd told me over tea one afternoon. Every time someone's nice to me, I wonder what they want. I'd understood completely. Mr. Webb had recovered physically from his heart episode, but he'd become isolated, depressed. The violation of trust had broken something in him that medical care couldn't fix. Asterisk, Mrs. Kim had lost her house despite our best efforts. The fraudulent mortgage had been too tangled to unwind quickly, and she'd been forced to sell and move in with her son. Asterisk, it's not the same. Her son had told me, translator between us, that house was her whole life. My father built it. She wanted to die there. Asterisk, these were the real costs. Not the money though that mattered, but the destruction of trust, safety, dignity. Asterisk, Jessica had stolen more than jewelry and cash. She'd stolen peace of mind. Asterisk, and for that, 20 years in prison seemed almost inadequate. Asterisk, but the aftermath wasn't all dark. Asterisk, my daughter. Ellen had started calling more often, visiting more, not because she thought I needed help, but because she'd realized I was someone worth knowing better. Asterisk, I spent my whole adult life thinking of you as my sweet, fragile mother, she'd said one evening. I never saw who you really were. Asterisk, who am I really? I'd asked, curious. Asterisk, fierce, strategic, stronger than anyone I know. She'd smiled. Where did that come from? Asterisk, it was always there. You just weren't looking for it. Asterisk, I'm looking now. Asterisk, and she was. We'd started having real conversations about my past, about the business I'd run after my husband died, about the life I'd lived that my children had never quite seen. Asterisk, it was strange, being truly seen at 73, but not unwelcome. I'd also started speaking at senior centers. Asterisk, the district attorney's office had asked if I'd be willing to talk to other elderly people about financial fraud, about recognizing warning signs, about fighting back. I'd agreed. My first talk had been to a small group at the community center, maybe 20 people, all looking at me with that familiar expression. Sweet old lady, probably confused. Nothing important to say. Asterisk, then, I'd told them about Jessica, about the theft, the documentation, the investigation, about how I'd caught her. The room had been silent. Afterward, a woman in her 80s had approached me. My nephew has been pressuring me to sign over power of attorney, she'd said quietly. He says it's to help me, but something feels wrong. Asterisk, trust that feeling, I'd told her, and document everything before you make any decisions. Asterisk, a month later, she'd called to thank me. The nephew had been trying to steal her house. Asterisk, she'd caught him, because she'd learned to look for the same signs I'd seen with Jessica. Asterisk, there were other stories like that, other people I'd helped. just by showing them that being old didn't mean being helpless. That awareness was a weapon. That kindness could coexist with strength. On a Tuesday morning in August, exactly 1 year after Jessica's arrest, I received a package. It was small, wrapped in brown paper, with no return address. Inside was my mother's bracelet. There was a note, written in handwriting I didn't recognize. Found this at an estate sale, looked up the name engraved inside. Thought you might want it back. No charge. Some things should be with their rightful owners. A friend. I held the jade carefully, feeling its familiar weight. My mother had worn this, my grandmother before her. It had traveled across an ocean, survived wars and migrations and generations, and now it was home. I cried then, for the first time since the whole ordeal began. Not from sadness, from relief. Ellen found me sitting in my chair, bracelet in hand, tears on my cheeks. Mom, what happened? Are you okay? I showed her the bracelet. Someone found it, sent it back. She sat beside me, staring. How? I don't know. Someone kind, I suppose. There are still kind people, Ellen said softly. Yes, I agreed. You just have to be careful about who you trust with your kindness. We sat together in silence, the bracelet catching the afternoon light. That evening, I wrote in my journal a habit I'd started during the investigation, a way to process everything I was experiencing. Today, I learned that not every story has perfect justice. Jessica is in prison, but her victims are still hurt. The money is partially recovered, but the trust is gone. And yet, I also learned that there are anonymous strangers who return stolen jewelry, daughters who learn to see their mothers clearly, communities that protect each other when someone shows them how. I learned that age is not weakness, that silence can be strength, that patience is a weapon more powerful than anger. I learned that I am still the woman I was 40 years ago, when I caught my husband's partner embezzling, still capable, still strong. I just hide it better now. People see an old woman with a cane. They don't see the mind that built an unshakable case, the determination that endured 3 months of fear, the strength that refused to be a victim. That's all right. Underestimation has always been my advantage. Jessica Martinez learned that, too late. I hope others learn it before they make her mistakes, whether they're predators who need to understand their targets aren't helpless, or victims who need to understand they have more power than they think. Age hides wisdom, not weakness. Kindness remembers, so does pain. And sometimes, the quietest voice in the room is the one you should fear most. I closed the journal and looked at my mother's bracelet, now safely in its box. Tomorrow, I would give it to Ellen, pass it on, as my mother had passed it to me. But tonight, I simply held it, remembering my mother's hands, placing it in mine. For your daughter, she'd said. For when you have a daughter, I'd had a daughter, raised her, loved her, tried to teach her to be strong. I'd thought I'd failed at that last part, because Ellen had grown up seeing me as someone who needed protecting. But maybe I'd taught her after all. Maybe she just needed to see me protect myself before she understood. Outside my window, the evening settled into darkness. Inside, I sat in my chair, the same chair I'd sat in when Jessica worked in my kitchen. When the police came, when I'd made the decision to fight back, I was still here. Still strong, still quiet, still underestimated. And that was exactly how I preferred it. Because predators look for obvious targets, loud victims, people who advertise their vulnerability. They don't look for the small, quiet old woman with the cane and the gentle smile. They don't see the bookkeeper who never forgets a number. The widow who saved her husband's business. The mother who taught her daughter's strength by example. The woman who spent 3 months building a case that sent a predator to prison. They don't see any of that until it's too late, and that's their first stand.